Edward Fishman is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, where he focuses on Europe and Russia. Joins us from Washington. Before we talk about Russia specifically, just tell me whether you buy this reason that Trump is giving, at least, that Comey was fired because of the way he handled the Clinton email investigation.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It certainly beggars credibility that the Trump administration fired Comey because of how he handled the Clinton investigation. From all that appears, it seems that this was a quite rushed decision by the Trump administration, and I think we still have to understand exactly what the rationale was.
All right, so how will this Comey firing then impact the meeting? We know that the Secretary of State has already met with Sergey Lavrov. Lavrov will now move on to meet with Trump. Will this impact the meeting at all?
I think it will. In an ideal situation, this would be an opportunity for President Trump to push Foreign Minister Lavrov on a variety of issues. For starters, Russia's recurring cyber interventions in democratic elections, most recently in France. But I think that these revelations last night, and particularly the firing of Comey, subtract from whatever little credibility President Trump has on Russia policy.
What impact will this firing, though, have on the investigation itself and to possible links between the Trump campaign and Russia?
Well, it's difficult to say. I mean, I think what we're seeing right now is there's momentum on the Hill behind having a special investigation, an independent one that can actually look into whether there were any links between the Trump campaign and Russia in an independent way. I think that firing Comey obviously means that we really do need an independent investigation more than ever.
What do you make of Lavrov's visit to Washington at this particular point? Does it mean that U.S. Russia relations are improving in any way?
I don't think so. I think it would be a bit hasty to go that far. I think, clearly there's a lot that the Russians want from the United States right now. For starters, Russia wants a free hand in Syria. It wants a free hand in Ukraine. The Trump administration has given some indications that it's willing to acquiesce to Russian interests in those areas. So I think that there's a lot that Lavrov could accomplish here. I think that President Trump would be well served, on the other hand, from being in listing mode. I think his credibility on Russia is at a low point right now. I think going for anything too ambitious would be a mistake. That said, all the while, with all this domestic turmoil here surrounding the investigation, foreign policy continues. And the Ukraine crisis continues. Russia continues to undermine the democratically elected government in Kiev, continues to interfere in Western elections, most recently the French election using cyber means. And these are things that directly counter U.S. interests. And so the longer that we have domestic uncertainty surrounding the investigation into the Trump administration, it's going to be very damaging from a U.S. foreign policy perspective vis-a-vis Russia.
And when you write in an op-ed earlier that Russia is still waging cyber war against Western democracy and it's time to push back, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, I think we saw an even more blatant Russian intervention in France's election recently than we saw in the U.S. election in 2016. And I think that means that Russia has not yet been deterred from launching these types of cyber attacks on elections in the West. And so I think it's high time for the United States and our allies in Europe to respond. I think a good response would start with significantly stronger sanctions against Russia. And that's something that both the United States and the EU could do. I think that with the election of President Macron in France, it's more likely that the European Union will be open to such a policy. And I think it would be smart for the Trump administration to get on board. Because, I think unless Russia knows that there will be significant costs for this type of cyber warfare, then I think it will just persist and continue to do this type of interference in Western elections.
All right, Edward Fishman, we thank you for speaking to us from Washington.